CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is with us now to talk about all this. All right, Major, so explain for our viewers, can the president's shift in strategy that we're seeing on his push for tax reform work?
Well, it might, but there is a great deal of work that needs to be done, and these meetings of a bipartisan nature are symbolic right now. That doesn't mean they're not important in the future. They could be, but bipartisanship when it comes to tax reform really won't be revealed until underlying details are known and votes are actually cast in the House and Senate. Then and only then will the president's bipartisan outreach be tested and maybe or maybe not achieve something historic, as he often says about the potential of tax reform. And there are a great deal of details that are still a complete mystery in Congress and in this White House. Yes, there are some broad numbers. Cut the corporate tax rate currently at 35% down to 15%. But even this Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, has said, well, we might not be able to get there. No one really knows what the White House bottom line is there. There are lots of other details about which deductions the administration wants to get rid of in the tax code, which it's willing to live with. And those kind of details are going to test the legislative writing capabilities of Republicans, which control the relevant committees in the House and Senate, and the political clout of this White House to push tax reform forward. All those things have yet to be tested.
So you mentioned that there are a lot of things that are still up in the air, but we have some general idea of what he's pushing for in terms of tax reform. So where do the clashes lie? What is pitting Republican against Democrat, and what's pitting Republican against Republican?
All right, let's start with Republican against Democrat. The estate tax, which Republicans for years and years have tried to call the death tax, essentially a federal tax imposed when you sell a large estate. Currently, the estate tax, if you're a couple, hits an estate valued at more than $11 million. Now, Republicans sometimes say, well, we're really trying to protect small businesses, small family farms. But if you look at the overall statistics and that income level, 11 million, that's not a lot of small mom and pop businesses or small family farms. Those are large estates. The president wants to eliminate that estate tax entirely. Democrats do not, and have already laid down a marker. We're not going to vote for that. That's just unacceptable to us. So that's one that pits Republicans and Democrats against one another. One that pits Republicans against Republicans is something called carried interest. It's a loophole that allows those who are managers of private equity funds and large other hedge funds to essentially pay a far lower tax rate on some of their income than an average American does. And these people make hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes as private equity or hedge fund managers. And they pay a tax rate that's a fraction of what most Americans pay. That's a loophole. During the campaign, candidate Trump said he wanted to eliminate it entirely. Well, some Republicans are not altogether in favor of that. Now the White House, because it's received some of that Republican pushback, is beginning to say, well, we'll only repeal that loophole if it doesn't create jobs. Well, who knows what a hedge fund manager's investments do in the context of job creation? What, if it creates 1 or 2 jobs, the loophole is acceptable? That's the kind of detail we haven't seen, but it's a bit of backsliding we've just noticed from the White House on what during the campaign was a very populist, almost Democrat-sounding idea that got a lot of populist fervor behind the president's approach to tax reform, and it's beginning to get watered down.
Major, before we let you go, I know yesterday during the White House press briefing, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked if the President of the United States had reached out to Mexico in the wake of their devastating earthquake. As you know, Mexico had offered to help the United States in the wake of Harvey. They've rescinded that offer because they need those resources for their own people. She said that the President was scheduled to speak to the Mexican President. Do we know if that happened?
We have not received a readout from the White House about that. I would not be surprised if that does happen. And it is typical for the United States to provide resources in times of need. Mexico, Canada, anyone in the hemisphere. Although it is worth pointing out, as Elaine Quijano, Mark Strassman, all of our colleagues have been pointing out for the better part of 2.5 weeks, we have some serious resource allocation issues to deal with in Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. And if I could bring those two issues back into the context of tax reform, the president tweeted this morning that because of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, there's a greater need for tax reform. Well, I'm not exactly sure what he means, but I'll tell you this. One of the other dividing issues for tax reform is, does reducing tax rates add to the deficit and then add to the federal debt? Many Republicans don't want tax reform to do that. They're more than happy to cut taxes, but they want other taxes raised, deductions eliminated, so it's revenue neutral. It doesn't add to deficits and debt. And that's an even bigger concern now, because clearly it will take tens of billions, possibly hundreds of billions of dollars of new federal resources to take care of the after effects of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. So the president may say it gives a great new reason to have tax reform, but on the dollars and cents side, it could actually make it harder.
All right.
That's a great point.
Major Garrett, thanks a lot.
Sure.